You think your Phillips screwdriver slipping out mid-turn is the tool failing you. It isn't. That slip is arguably the single most important feature Henry Phillips ever patented, and it's a big part of the reason assembly lines could mass-produce anything at all. By the end of this video, you'll understand how the screw and the tool that turns it evolved from hand-fitted armor hardware into one of the most quietly contested pieces of engineering history. Why the design that won almost never wins for the reason you'd assume, and why that flat piece of metal twisting in your hand is doing something far more deliberate than it looks. Start with the screw itself, because the shape existed long before anyone used it to hold two pieces of wood together. The screw as a mechanism, a spiral thread wrapped around a shaft, goes back to antiquity. Archimedes is credited with a screw-shaped pump for lifting water around the 3rd century BC, and centuries later the Greek engineer Hero of Alexandria described wooden screw presses used to crush olives and grapes. None of that involved fastening anything. The screw as a way to hold two objects together. The version this video is actually about doesn't show up clearly until European armorers and clockmakers started using small threaded fittings sometime around the 15th and 16th centuries, and for centuries after that, it stayed a craft product. A locksmith or armorer cut the threads on a single screw to match a single fitting, by hand, and the two were made for each other specifically, not for any screw and any driver in general. There was no such thing as walking into a shop and buying a screw that fit hardware someone else had made. Interchangeability, the idea that any screwdriver could turn any screw of the right size, made by anyone, anywhere, took another 3 centuries to arrive, and it arrived through standardization, not convenience. In 1841, British engineer Joseph Whitworth proposed the first widely adopted standard screw thread, fixing the angle and pitch so that nuts, bolts, and screws made in different workshops could actually fit together. American manufacturing developed its own competing standard a couple of decades later, championed by engineer William Sellers in 1864. Only once thread standards like these existed could anyone seriously imagine building a machine, let alone a whole factory, out of parts made in different places by different hands, all guaranteed to fit. Here's the first thing worth correcting up front. It's tempting to picture the screwdriver as one of those tools that's basically always existed in its current form, quietly unchanged since some ancient craftsman figured it out. It's the opposite. Everything about how a screw and its driver relate to each other, the shape, the fit, the tolerance, the assumption that parts from different manufacturers will simply work together, is a relatively modern invention, built specifically to solve a problem hand craftsmanship never had to deal with, building the same thing, identically, millions of times, as fast as possible. And that problem became urgent very quickly once car manufacturing arrived. Henry Ford's moving assembly line, running by 1913, needed screws driven in by machine, at speed, all day, every day. There was a serious flaw standing in the way. The standard flat slotted screw head is genuinely bad at working with power tools. A power driver coming in at speed has nothing to hold it centered. It rides straight off the slot sideways if the alignment's even slightly off, gouging the surrounding metal or paint, snapping the screw, or just wasting time on a line where every wasted second multiplied across a shift adds up fast. Manufacturing needed a screw head that a machine could find and stay locked onto by itself. On a line running thousands of vehicles a year, even a small constant rate of slip drivers and redos wasn't a minor annoyance. It was measurable lost hours multiplied across every shift, every day, indefinitely, on top of the material actually being damaged. The line couldn't slow down to let a person double-check every single screw. It needed the screw itself to make alignment nearly impossible to get wrong. The fix that eventually solved it wasn't originally Henry Phillips's idea, which is the second correction worth making, because history tends to flatten this into a one-man origin story. An inventor named John P. Thompson had already developed and patented an early cross-recessed screw head years before Phillips got involved. But Thompson couldn't get manufacturers interested and couldn't commercialize it himself. Around 1932, he sold the rights to Henry F. Phillips, a Portland, Oregon businessman who spent the next few years refining the design into something factories would actually adopt. Phillips patented the finished crosshead screw in 1936 and founded the Phillips Screw Company. And General Motors' Cadillac division adopted it for assembly line use almost immediately. Word spread through the industry fast once other manufacturers saw the difference on the line. Fewer strip screws, fewer stalled stations, less scrap material. By the early 1940s, the Phillips head had gone from a single automaker's experiment to something close to a national manufacturing standard. Adopted widely enough that within about a decade, it had become the default screw head most of American industry reached for first. The name on the patent isn't always the name of the person who had the original idea. It's often the name of whoever figures out how to actually get it built and sell it to everyone else fast enough that nobody remembers who was there first. Here's what made the crosshead design genuinely brilliant, and it's the part that flips this entire video's premise. The recessed cross shape does two things at once. It self-centers, guiding a power driver's tip automatically into alignment the instant it touches the screw, solving the riding off sideways problem outright. And it's engineered to cam out. Once torque climbs past a certain point, the angled walls of the recess actively push the driver bit up and out of the screw head instead of letting it keep spinning. That's not a manufacturing defect people have been quietly tolerating for 90 years. That's the screw itself deciding when to stop. A built-in torque limiter that kept early power tools from over-tightening screws into stripped holes, cracked housings, and ruined paint jobs on a line moving too fast for a human to catch every mistake by hand. Phillips didn't design a screwdriver that slips. He designed a screwdriver that knows when to quit, which frankly, most tools still haven't learned. Mechanically, it's a simple trick once you see it. The walls of the cross-shaped recess are cut at an angle, rather than straight down. So as torque builds, and the driver tries to keep biting deeper, the geometry itself converts some of that rotational force into an upward push. Past a certain threshold, that upward push wins, and the bit rides up and out. Nobody has to program a sensor or set a limit. The shape does the calculation, purely through physics, every single time, identically, whether it's a factory robot or someone's grandfather in a garage. That's the refrain worth carrying through the rest of this video. That slip isn't the tool losing. It's the tool doing exactly what it was told to do. Here's the third correction, and it's the one with the best twist in this entire story. The technically superior alternative, a design that holds torque beautifully and essentially never cams out, actually came first and lost anyway. In 1908, a Canadian inventor named Peter L. Robertson patented a square socket screw head, sometimes called the Robertson drive. The square socket grips a matching square tip driver on all four sides at once, rather than relying on angled cross-shaped walls, which means it barely slips at all, even under heavy torque. By most engineering measures, it's a better fastening system than the Phillips head that came nearly 30 years later. It's still the standard in Canadian carpentry and construction today. So why isn't it the standard everywhere? Not because of physics, because of business. Robertson, having been burned once already by a licensing partner who tried to cut him out of his own invention, became fiercely protective of the patent, refusing to license it broadly to outside manufacturers. He came close to a major deal with Ford to supply screws for the Model T, and it collapsed over exactly that control issue. Ford wanted guaranteed supply from multiple manufacturers. Robertson wouldn't allow it, and Ford walked. American manufacturers went looking for an alternative instead, and a few decades later, Phillips's more freely licensed design was sitting right there waiting for them. The better engineered fastener didn't lose on merit. It lost on a contract that never got signed. Meanwhile, back home, the Robertson screw quietly became something close to a point of national pride. Canadian workshops, shipbuilders, and furniture makers adopted it widely, and it earned a reputation for genuinely holding torque that Phillips heads still can't match, reliable enough that Britain's de Havilland Mosquito, one of the most effective combat aircraft of the Second World War, used Robertson screws throughout its largely wooden fabric airframe, specifically because they resisted loosening under the constant vibration of flight. It's still the default screw in Canadian hardware stores today, to the point that plenty of Canadians grow up assuming the rest of the world uses it too, and are mildly betrayed to learn otherwise. If a piece of hardware you've never thought twice about turns out to have this much buried history and business drama behind it, liking the video helps this reach people who'd enjoy finding that out as much as you just did. Now, the part of this story that pushes the whole idea even further. Cam out is a feature right up until the moment you actually need maximum torque and nothing else will do. Aerospace assembly, high-performance engines, situations where a driver popping out mid-turn isn't a safety feature, it's a liability. So engineers kept iterating past Phillips entirely. In 1967, a design team at the Camcar division of Textron developed the Torx drive, a 6-point star-shaped socket that spreads torque across far more contact surface than either a cross or a square, virtually eliminating cam out altogether, even under serious mechanical force. Torx became the standard anywhere high torque and precision both matter. Automotive engines, bicycles, aerospace hardware, and later got adapted into tamper-resistant security variants with a small pin sitting in the center of the star, specifically to block standard bits and keep people out of electronics they weren't supposed to be opening. Game console manufacturers and phone makers leaned on exactly this trick for years, quietly discouraging their own customers from opening the products they just bought. An entire arms race of increasingly obscure screwheads, essentially built on the same core idea Phillips patented in 1936, just aimed at keeping people out instead of letting machines in. Here's the fourth and final correction, because it undercuts an assumption baked into almost everything in this video so far. It's easy to assume powered screwdriving is a fairly recent convenience, something that showed up sometime in living memory alongside cordless drills at the hardware store. It's much older than that. The first patent for an electric drill was filed all the way back in 1889 in Melbourne, Australia, by engineers Arthur James Arnott and William Blanche Brain, decades before Phillips even entered this story. Those early drills were heavy, corded, and mostly confined to industrial workshops with the infrastructure to run them. The bigger leap came in 1961, when Black & Decker released the first cordless battery-powered drill driver, untethering the tool from the wall entirely, and turning what had been a fixed workshop machine into something you could carry to wherever the job actually was. That same cordless battery technology went on to one of the more unusual jobs a screwdriver has ever had. NASA contracted with Black & Decker in the years around the Apollo program to help develop lightweight self-contained battery-powered tools astronauts could use to core samples out of the lunar surface. Because there's no wall outlet on the moon, no atmosphere to carry the sound of a motor straining under load, and no room for error in equipment nobody could repair 300,000 kilometers from the nearest hardware store. The engineering lessons learned building a drill that had to work flawlessly in a vacuum fed, straight back into the cordless tools that eventually showed up in ordinary garages a decade or two later. The tool tightening your kitchen cabinet hinge and the tool that helped bring rocks back from another world are running on the same basic idea, refined across roughly a century. Even the cam out or not argument never really ended, it just moved into the tool itself. Modern electric screwdrivers and drill drivers ship with adjustable clutch settings, letting the user dial in exactly how much torque the motor's allowed to apply before it disengages, essentially building Phillips's original 1936 torque limiter directly into the tool instead of relying on the screw head to provide it. The argument over how much force a fastener should be allowed to take before something gives didn't get resolved. It just quietly got a dial. You think a screwdriver slipping is the tool failing you. It's the opposite. It's the small, precise engineering decision that let an entire century of machines assemble the modern world, without stripping it apart screw by screw. Phillips built a torque limiter disguised as an inconvenience. Robertson built the better mousetrap and refused to sell enough of them. And everything since has just been an argument, still ongoing, over exactly how much a screw should be allowed to fight back. If you want more of the everyday objects that turn out to be hiding genuinely contested engineering history, the kind of thing sitting in a kitchen drawer with a century of quiet rivalry behind it. Subscribing means you catch the next one. And I'd honestly like to know in the comments whether you're a Phillips household or you've already converted to square drive, because that argument in the comments section of any video like this one is always more heated than it has any right to be. One last thing, because it closes the loop on basically everything in this video, and it's the drive you've probably used most recently without realizing it. If you've ever assembled flat pack furniture, you've used a hex socket screw turned by an L-shaped metal rod, an Allen key, patented in the United States by William G. Allen in 1943 through the Allen Manufacturing Company. The hex socket makes full contact along all 6 internal faces at once, which means it resists cam out almost as well as Robertson's design does, and it's dramatically cheaper to manufacture than any of the drives that came before it. That combination, cheap, strong, simple, is exactly why an entire global furniture industry standardized on it. IKEA's flat pack model traces back to 1956, when an employee named Gillis Lundgren, struggling to fit a finished table into his car, simply took the legs off and put them in the trunk separately. The moment that turned "assemble it yourself" from an inconvenience into the entire business model. Every flat pack box that's followed since has needed a fastening system cheap enough to include for free by the millions, forgiving enough for an amateur with no training to use correctly on the first try, and strong enough to hold real furniture together for years. The humble hex socket won that job quietly, and it's been sitting in a small plastic bag inside your furniture ever since. The same underlying argument as the Phillips screw in your kitchen drawer, just handed to you in a language a beginner could use without ever knowing there was a century of engineering rivalry behind it.